We spent every weekend growing up at the cottage, mainly because we didn't really have a choice, but it was also family fun. Every weekend during the summer months we stayed at the cottage, there was a dance at the local pavilion. It was put on by the township and generally had a fair number of people there, the sum of which was made up by a plethora of random people: teens, some elderly, the year-round cottagers, and a handful of city folk just trying to let loose while Cotton Eye Joe blared over the sound system. We fell into the last category. Our cottage was set off on a small lake, fairly deep within the woods. You can walk almost in any direction for a few kilometers before running into anything of substance. I imagine it's part of the reason my parents picked it. The cottage itself was actually built on the land my dad bought brick by brick over the number of years, so we've all grown up with it. The cottage is a typical dollhouse shape. At least, when we were kids, that's what we called it. It doesn't go underground at all and has a couple of really cool features. One of them being that there's a natural rock on the ground floor that the house was built around. Other things we loved as kids were the skylights in the bedrooms upstairs. Since there was no light pollution up north, you can lay in bed and fall asleep looking at the stars. Being inside, safe and warm, was a wonderful way to view the world, especially with a dad like ours who insisted on telling spooky stories around the campfire. For the first few years of my time at the cottage, I was convinced that it was built on an Indian burial ground. He also used to tell this story of how every summer a creature would crawl out of the lake and search for children to eat. Looking back, I get that it's all in good fun, but let me tell you, as a child, there were a lot of sleepless nights at the cottage. When we were younger, we loved going to the dance and sliding around in our socks on the waxed pavilion floor, or trying to look cool in front of the other kids who were dragged to the dance on Saturday night. We actually had to drive past the pavilion itself when we came to the cottage, so to get back out to it on Saturday night, you have to drive maybe 15 minutes back down the winding one-way road which twisted and turned towards our cottage. The road itself was almost surrounded by trees, so any slight deviation in the path could lead to a head-on collision with a tree. This could be especially dangerous after a night of having a few drinks, and because of that, the road was no stranger to accidents. The first time my dad played the prank in question, we were coming back from the dance, maybe around 11 o'clock. Part of the deal after making the 1.5-hour trek to the cottage was that once we met the one-way winding road just past the pavilion, we were always allowed to take off our seatbelts. Why? I have no idea. It's by far the most dangerous part of the journey, yet this has always been the way. Even to this day, the rare times I go up there with my friends, even they know the rule to unclip their seatbelts at the appropriate time, as if to acknowledge the tradition. On our way back this night, however, my dad had a brilliant idea, and 10 minutes from the cottage, at the darkest point in the road, he let out a curse word. "Damn it," he said almost under his breath. "What?" my mom said. Even to this day, I don't know whether my mom was playing along or simply just curious as to what was happening, but either way, it was convincing. "Something's up with the car," he said in his serious voice. Part of what bothered us so much about this road as kids, besides the creepy winding nature of it, was the fact that it was so isolated. Even at an early age, the feeling of being alone is an absolute bone-chilling thought. After a brief moment and a few more curse words, the car rolled to a stop and the engine cut out. As the lights turned off and the car became bathed in darkness, my brother and I shared a look of absolute panic and fear. The road was pitch black, and immediately the outside world beyond the car became crystal clear as all light dissipated in an instant. My mother at this point must have gotten the joke because she started twisting the knife. "Oh no, kids, I think we have to walk back," she said without turning her head towards us, probably because she was smiling. My brother and I now shot a look at my sister in the back seat, who was at this point just waking up from passing out at the dance. She was the youngest of us and, of course, the most susceptible to believing the lie. But at this point, I think we all felt like my mom was telling the truth. We kept saying, "Try the car again." We asked questions like, "How can it be dead?" Or, "What happened to the tires?" Obviously, knowing nothing about cars helped my parents sell the lie. After an exasperated sigh from my dad, he turned to us and, in his serious tone that we'd all come to fear after hearing it countless times, and said, "Okay, kids, hop out." Being stuck in a dying car on a one-way Cottage road in the middle of the night as a young child is a terrifying ordeal. Being told that you now need to get out and walk home when you also don't really know the way is even more terrifying of an ordeal. And luckily, the eruption of tears from my younger sister was enough to end their joke. My parents didn't dare let their fun end though, and continued in character. "Well, I guess I'll try the car again," my dad said, and sure enough, it started up with a sigh of relief from all three of us. In the moment, we were just glad to be in the safety of the car. They must have felt it was particularly funny because of the frequency they did it from that moment forward. It became a regular thing, and anyone who visited the cottage for the weekend got dragged along to the dance and got a grand showing of the stalled car routine. By the third or fourth time, we'd had all manner of people in the van with us when it happened. Grandparents who played along, kids who nervously acted tough, and a slew of aunts and uncles who took up Dad on his offer of getting out and walking home on more than one occasion. Looking back, it was mostly good fun, and I think that's how my family remember it. But that's not the whole story. This next part, I've never told anyone. As I said, we never wore our seatbelts on this country road, and once it was realized by everyone coming with us to the dance, the prime seating for the children became the trunk. The van had a large rear window, as most family vans do, and seeing the red lights of the van illuminate the road behind us as we drove the twisted trail home was exhilarating. That, and it was just so neat to watch the road trail out before you. My best friend Tommy and I were maybe 11 at the time, old enough to know things were jokes, but young enough to still get rattled when the time came to pile into the van and take the winding road back to the cottage. We sat in the trunk. Tom and I sat in the back seat and watched the road barrel away from us as my dad took us back to the cottage, and as if on cue, a familiar sound came from the front seat. "Damn it," my dad said under his breath. To my brother, sister, and I, we knew what this meant, however. No matter how many times we had had it happen to us, it still unnerved me. Maybe because just the idea of being stuck in the woods terrified me, or maybe because each time my dad would add another level of tension, such as a longer wait, or getting out and checking something under the car, or sometimes actually making us get out. This time was different. The car rolled to a stop, and he turned off the ignition. I turned towards the front of the car and saw my dad putting on a show for my sister and her friends, while my brother, being almost 14, probably tried helping my dad weave his tail. I watched them for a few minutes as the silent woods creaked around us with each gust of wind outside the car, and eventually I turned back to Tommy, who was staring out the back of the van. All the color was drained from his face. "Tommy?" I said almost with a hushed voice of concern. He didn't stir. He just kept staring out the back of the window as the front of the van continued their routine. I saw tears begin to well up in his eyes, and I turned to see what he was looking at. To this day, I wish I hadn't, because it still eats at me. On the cusp of the woods behind the van stood something, staring at us. Here is exactly what I remember. Believe me or don't, I don't care. It was the height of a man, that's for sure, because it had one hand on a tree. Its skin was loose and hanging from its body. Its hands were only 3 long fingers and were covered in dirt, and what I can only imagine now was wet blood. Above all else, what stuck with me the most were the eyes. They were black and empty. They looked devoid of life. Then it fell to the ground and began to crawl towards us on all 4s. I cannot fathom what I would have said had I tried to explain myself back then, and for an instant, I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed with fear as this creature slowly dragged its loose skin across the dirt towards us. The silence of the trunk was broken by Tommy, who began bawling, which, in the moment, I couldn't have thanked him enough, because hearing that made my sister break out crying as well, based on the situation in the car, not what went on behind it. This signaled the end of my dad's joke. My attention briefly shot to the front of the car to see my dad starting the car and my brother comforting my sister. I quickly turned back to Tommy, who was staring at me as the car started up, and in that instant, a horrible tableau was imprinted in my memory. The red light of the brake lights illuminated the creature's face, which was now inches away from the van's rear window. I screamed, and my dad drove. In the fading light, we could see the creature fall back onto all 4s and begin crawling. Just typing this has made me remember the night more vividly than I wish I had to. No one else saw the creature in the back, and Tommy and I silently went to bed. That night, I tossed and turned. Tommy and I shared one of the bedrooms, and I don't think he slept all night. I did eventually pass out around 3 or 4 a.m., confident that at least I was safe in the cottage, but it wasn't a sound sleep I remember. When I woke up the next day, Tommy was packed and ready to go, his stuff by the door. The 2 of us had shared a knowing look, but something was wrong. His eyes were bloodshot with fresh tears, and I had a nagging feeling. Eventually, he pulled me aside. "Last night," he said. "I know, I saw it too," I said, trying to reassure him. "We're leaving today. It never happened." "You saw it too?" he asked as if he didn't believe me. "Yes, of course," I said, concerned. "How the hell did you sleep then?" he asked almost aggressively. I don't know. I guess I just wanted to stop thinking about it on the road," I said, but he cut me off before I could finish. "No," he said with tears welling in his eyes. "I mean, did you see it again last night? In the skylight?" To this day, in the bedroom upstairs, you can see the imprint of the creature's 3-fingered hand on the glass, the spot where its long fingers stretched out over a small portion of the window, leaving a greasy, red stain behind. A constant reminder of the creature that found us after a simple prank my dad played. Edit. After 10 years of silence, I tried getting in touch with Tommy. After writing about the night in question, a lot of your comments helped convince me to maybe see what Tommy is doing. Maybe reminisce a little bit, talk about old times, and maybe the creature. For all I know, the creature was put out of his mind, and I'd be happy for that. But I need to ask the question I was afraid to ask. Did he ever see it again? Did he ever think about it? Was it all a bad dream? I spoke to my wife about what I should do, and she convinced me that seeing this thing through might be for the best. At the very least, I should check up on him and see where it leads. She's beyond understanding, and I couldn't go through this without her. The last I heard, he'd moved downtown with his girlfriend, I didn't have his number or address or anything like that. In truth, we weren't even acquaintances anymore. I didn't even have him on Facebook. He got really weird after high school, big into drugs, and became a bit of a recluse. So, after sitting on it for a bit, I thought maybe the best way to get a hold of him was to go through his mom. His mom and I were close, as childhood friends and their parents usually are. When you grow up spending every weekend, or even the occasional weekday dinner at their house, you naturally get close. Tommy's mom worked at Home Depot. My wife and I had run into her a few years ago and had some simple chit-chat. This is where I learnt about where Tommy, or Tom, was now. I often forget that the names we call each other when we're younger usually fade away when we grow up. Hearing his mom call him Tom was a sad awakening to the amount of time that had passed since I last spoke to him. She told me about what was going on in his life, how he didn't talk to them much anymore, that he'd shied away from being as outgoing and social as he was when he was younger, and I appreciated her talking about him. At that time, I remember not being concerned with the fact that Tommy had changed because, well, people change. But this was years ago. He may not even be living in the country anymore, let alone still downtown with his girlfriend. So yesterday after work, I stopped by Home Depot in hopes that she was working. I think part of me hoped that she wasn't working. I know it sounds shitty of me, but put yourself in my shoes. This way, I could use it as an excuse to myself, to tell myself I tried, and just go back home and forget this whole thing ever happened. Sadly, she was working. When I approached her, I knew something was immediately wrong. We had known each other for over 15 years, and every time I had seen her in those 15 years, I was greeted with a hug, a smile, or at least a polite nod. But today, all I saw on her face was immense sadness. I don't want to go through the exact scene play by play. I'm going to get straight to the point. Tom is dead. He passed away early this year. We're talking months ago. I don't have details on how he died. I didn't ask for obvious reasons. I didn't do her the injustice of rushing her through her grief to fulfill my questions. Regardless of the fact that Tom and I hadn't spoken in years, he was still my best friend for a good portion of my life. Some would say the most important years of my life. I may be married now and have moved on with my life, but I can't help but feel that I left Tommy behind, that I ran away and he was left to deal with his own pain by himself. She took her dinner break and we sat in the parking lot talking about Tommy and how amazing he was. I apologized about not being at the funeral, explaining that I wasn't aware and that I had no idea, and she just kindly brushed it off, telling me that they didn't hold a big ceremony. Just the family and his girlfriend he had been living with attended. I still felt awful for not attending, regardless of her exoneration for not attending. I think I ended up apologizing a lot. I just remember saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry," after everything she said. I'm sure to her it was annoying, but to me, it was my immense guilt seeping out. We sat in silence for a long time before she had to get back to work. She asked me to come by the house more often, as Tommy's dad would like to see me too, and catch up as well. She said she didn't know why Tom and I had stopped talking all those years ago, but she wanted to catch up and have it like old times. I promised her I would stop by and catch up. And that was it. She left and I just sat in my car for a long while. Now, I want to talk about the part that is really bothering me. How all this started. And why this all came out now of all times. Why I wrote my first memory in the first place, and what's going on in my life and what happened that night at the cottage. See, there's no reason for me to dredge up the past. I'm happily married now, fulfilled at work, and I experience nothing but joy here in my own little world. Why bring up something, post it online, and stir up all this mess? I had suppressed this memory of the cottage and Tommy, and I was happier for it. Until last month, when I started having these dreams, these really vivid dreams. You can see I even posted about the first dream I had, the night I had the dream about my grandfather back in February. You can read it and see for yourself. After that dream, I started remembering what happened at the cottage and what happened to Tommy and myself because I started seeing the creature again.